Welcome back to Complete Aviation Solutions for another deep dive.
Deep dive number 51.
Yeah,
That's
right.
right.
I like how you keep me honest there. And today you've brought us kind of a grab bag of reports, really, but all dealing with
Yeah.
some financial stuff going on in the industry. And I'm
Yeah,
really,
some strategic shifts.
yeah,
Some
absolutely.
pretty major moves
Big time.
across the globe.
Yeah, so we're going to be looking at Air Mauritius and some things that have happened with them, and then
Okay.
potentially some developments in Namibia,
Interesting.
FlyNas and their big plans, and then,
Ambitious plans.
yeah, really ambitious, and then Precision Air in Tanzania.
Okay, so kind of all over the map.
Really all over.
But a good picture of, I think, how airlines are having to adapt in
Mm,
this current climate.
absolutely. So why don't we jump right in with Air Mauritius?
Sounds good.
Because they've had a really interesting financial development here
Yeah.
with their parent company, Airport Holding Limited, and they have essentially wiped out this massive loan that
Ah.
Air Mauritius had.
Yeah.
It was 8.05 billion Mauritian rupees.
Wow. That's a lot of rupees.
That's a lot of rupees.
I don't even know what a rupee looks like.
Yeah, that translates to about 176 million US dollars.
Okay, that's real money.
So this is not insignificant.
Nope, not at all.
So they've turned this into equity, and I think for people who maybe aren't super financially savvy,
Yeah.
can you explain just kind of what that means and why it was such a big deal for the airline?
Sure. So basically, they had this big loan hanging over their head.
Yeah.
Right? And it was really weighing them down. So the parent company, by converting it into equity, they're essentially saying,
Yeah.
We're not just going to lend you this money.
Right.
We're actually going to invest in you.
Right.
We believe in your future, and we want to be a part of it.
Yeah. It's a vote of confidence.
Exactly.
Right.
And, it's not just about, clearing the debt.
Mm-hmm.
It's about showing that long-term commitment,
Yeah.
which I think is really important in this industry.
Absolutely. And they've, even said publicly in a statement that this move provides them with, quote, firm and binding commitment for financial support as and when required.
That's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big statement.
Yeah, it really is.
And that's, as you said, a big vote of confidence.
Yeah.
And it's a really positive signal to investors, to creditors,
Yeah,
to the market as a whole.
absolutely. And they even were very emphatic in saying that shutting down
Right.
was never an option, which makes you wonder if it really was.
Well, I mean,
And
it's not like they were in a pretty tough spot.
Yeah, yeah.
So, it's interesting because this loan actually dates back to 2022.
Oh, okay.
So this has been going on for a while.
Wow.
And the chairman of the company has talked about how, they had accumulated all these losses, 317 million euros over a period of time, and a big shareholder equity deficit.
Right.
And he actually said that the delay in converting this loan to equity was a big problem
Interesting.
for their credit profile.
Yeah.
So this recent move seems like it's addressing a long-standing issue.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I guess it's not like a surprise that they got to this point.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And it finally happened. In February this year, they finally converted this debt
Okay.
into these things called non-voting convertible and redeemable preference shares, or NCRPS for short.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, I know it sounds very complicated, but essentially it's a way for them to
Right.
raise capital without giving up control of the company.
Interesting.
So it's a kind of a clever financial maneuver.
So these NCRPS shares, they can be converted into common stock later on or redeemed?
Exactly.
Okay.
So that gives them some flexibility.
Gotcha. So it's kind of a temporary Band-Aid to this larger...
It's a short-term solution to a long-term problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I guess I'm kind of curious. They've done this. They've converted this debt. They've gotten this, quote unquote, firm and binding commitment from their parent company.
Right.
But it seems like they're not stopping there.
No, they're not.
Right. So what else is going on?
Well, they're also working with the government to try to raise an additional 2 billion rupees,
Mm-hmm.
which is about 44 million US dollars.
Wow. Okay.
And they're also looking at getting more support from their shareholders.
Okay.
And they've even got, about 1.2 billion rupees from unflown ticket sales that they might be able to use.
So like vouchers and stuff that people haven't used?
Exactly, yeah. So they're really trying to pull out all the stops here.
Wow. So they're really trying to shore up their finances in every way possible.
It seems that way, yeah.
So I guess, what's the chairman's plan? I mean, what is he...
Well, he's got a pretty aggressive plan. He wants to try to streamline operations
Okay.
with a new budget plan, and he's hoping to recover 2 billion rupees within a year.
Wow, that's ambitious.
It is very ambitious, and the ultimate goal is to get Air Mauritius back to profitability by 2026.
Okay, so he's really giving himself a short runway here
He is, yeah.
to turn things around.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he can pull it off.
Yeah. And they currently have a fleet of 12 aircraft.
Okay.
They serve 14 destinations via 13 routes with around 30 daily flights.
All right, so it's not,
Not a huge operation.
not a huge operation, but still, they've got to make it work.
Yeah. So I guess we'll have to see how that all plays out.
Exactly.
All right, so let's switch gears a little bit geographically and head over to Namibia.
Okay, to Africa?
Yes.
Always exciting things happening.
Yeah, and this is really interesting because the new president there has announced his intention to relaunch a national airline,
A new one.
a brand new one,
Wow.
as a public-private partnership.
Interesting.
And he wants to do this sometime between June and December of 2026.
Wow, that's a pretty tight timeline.
Really tight.
To launch an airline. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that.
Absolutely.
Getting the planes, the staff, the routes.
All of it.
The permits.
Yeah, so it seems really ambitious, but they seem to be moving very quickly.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So the plan, as it stands right now, is to complete a market study by June 2025.
Okay.
And then by August of 26, they want to finalize public-private partnership.
Right.
And then they want to have all the negotiations concluded by December 2025.
Okay, so a lot to do in a short amount of time.
Yeah, a ton to do in a very short amount of time.
Ambitious.
Very ambitious. So the president's even allocated 20 million Namibian dollars, which is about 1.1 million US dollars for a feasibility study. And the Ministry of Works and Transport is going to oversee this whole thing.
Right.
And we've heard that the president really sees a national airline as this symbol of national pride.
Sure, makes sense.
Yeah, and the ruling party's election manifesto even suggested that they might need 3 billion Namibian dollars, which translates to about 163 million US dollars over 5 years to support this new airline.
Wow.
So that's a big potential commitment.
It is, yeah.
So I guess I'm curious, what are your initial thoughts on this whole idea? I mean, you think that...
Well, I mean, it's certainly an ambitious plan.
Yeah.
Especially considering what happened with their last national airline.
Right.
But, I think it's great that they're aiming high.
Yeah.
And, national pride can be a powerful motivator.
Absolutely.
Can really galvanize people and get them behind a project.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, an airline has to be a viable business.
Right. They can't just fly on...
Exactly. Can't just fly on patriotism.
Yeah.
It needs to have, sound financial management.
Yeah.
A good business model.
And a way to make money.
And ultimately make money. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see how they approach this.
Yeah. And the Minister of Works and Transport did say that the reestablishment of this airline would be undertaken prudently and that it wouldn't cost the government millions of dollars.
Okay, good. So they're aware of the potential pitfalls.
It seems like it.
Okay.
Yeah. And he also emphasized this quote unquote unmeasurable economic contribution of having a national airline.
Sure.
So it'll be interesting to see how they quantify that.
Right. Exactly. How do you measure that?
Right.
But, it's clear that they see this as a really important project for the country.
Absolutely. And what's really important is they've said very clearly that this is not going to be a revival of Air Namibia, which was their previous national carrier, which was liquidated back in 2021 after it had received something like 8 billion Namibian dollars.
Wow. Yeah, that didn't end well.
Not at all.
$8 billion in bailouts. That's
a lot of bailouts.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, over 3 decades.
Over 3 decades.
Yeah, due to just ongoing financial instability and just operational inefficiencies.
Yeah, it sounds like they were just throwing money at a problem.
Yeah.
Hoping it would go away.
Yeah, and so now they're trying to learn from these really expensive lessons.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So I guess, what do you think are the key differences that they need to kind of establish?
Well, I think the biggest thing is they need a clear and sustainable funding model.
Okay.
Right? They can't just keep relying on government bailouts.
Right.
They need to find a way to make the airline profitable on its own.
Yeah.
And they also need a much more efficient operational structure.
Okay.
They need to get rid of any waste and streamline their processes.
Right.
And I think maybe even more importantly, they need a really strong management team.
Okay.
People who have a lot of experience in the airline industry.
Right.
And who can make tough decisions.
And who aren't going to be swayed by politics.
Exactly. And who aren't afraid to say no to the government
Yeah.
if they need to.
Which is probably what happened last time.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
So, it's a tall order, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, and they're hoping that this public-private partnership model is going to, be structured correctly and bring in that private sector.
Yeah. Hopefully that'll help.
Hopefully. Yeah.
Bring in some fresh ideas, some expertise.
Yeah, and maybe even some capital.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure they're going to need a lot of it.
Yeah. So I guess the local analysts there are really waiting to see what the upcoming government budget is going to say.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, because it should shed more light on how they're planning to fund this.
Right, and hopefully they've learned from the mistakes of the past.
Exactly.
Yeah, they've got a solid plan in place.
Yeah, it really does feel like they're walking a tightrope here between, this national aspiration of having this airline and the reality of financial viability.
Yeah, you've got to balance those two things.
You do.
And it's not easy.
Yeah, and I guess the proof is going to be in the pudding, right? I mean, once we see how they actually plan to operate this thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Windhoek International Airport is going to be their base.
Makes sense.
That makes sense. But yeah, we'll just have to see what routes they choose, how efficient they are, how they compete.
Yeah.
There's already existing airlines there. So.
Exactly. They're going to have competition.
Yeah.
It'll be a challenge.
It will be.
But, I'm rooting for them.
Me too.
I hope they can make it work.
Okay, so let's switch gears yet again and head over to Saudi Arabia, where the low-cost carrier FlyNas has just gotten the green light from the kingdom's Capital Market Authority to go ahead with their plans for an IPO.
Initial public offering.
Initial public offering.
Big step.
Huge step, and they're going to be offering 30% of their shares on the Saudi exchange.
Wow. All right, so they're going public.
They are.
That's exciting.
It is. And for folks out there who maybe aren't, financial wizards.
Right.
Can you explain kind of what an IPO is and why it's such a significant step for a company?
Sure. So an IPO is basically when a private company decides to sell shares of its stock to the public for the first time.
Okay.
So they go from being a privately held company to a publicly traded company.
Yeah.
And this allows them to raise a lot of capital, which they can then use to grow their business.
Okay.
They can buy new planes, expand into new markets, things like that.
Makes sense.
And it also increases the company's visibility and prestige.
Right, because now anyone can buy stock in them.
Exactly.
So, and the figures for FlyNas leading up to this look really impressive.
Yeah, they've been doing really well.
They have, in 2023, their revenue was 6.3 billion Saudi riyals.
Okay.
Which is about 1.68 billion US dollars.
So they're making money.
They're making money. And that represents a 32% growth year on year.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's going to get investors excited.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that kind of growth is really impressive.
Yeah.
It shows that they're doing something right.
Yeah.
And that they're in a strong position to continue growing.
Absolutely. And their ownership structure is also kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Kingdom Holding Company,
which
is controlled by Prince Al-Walid bin Talal Al Saud, holds a 37% stake in the company.
All right.
And the country's public investment fund has 17% and is looking to increase that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's some pretty significant backing from some pretty significant players.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that shows a lot of confidence in the company.
Yeah.
And it also suggests that FlyNas is seen as strategically important to Saudi Arabia.
Right.
They're not just a random airline. They're a key player in the country's economic development.
Yeah, absolutely. And Prince Al-Walid has even said that they're hoping to raise around 7.5 billion Saudi riyals, which is about $2 billion US dollars through this IPO.
It's a lot of money.
It is. They initially planned to do this last year in 2024, but it seems like it's finally moving forward.
Right.
So, I mean, what do you think they might do with all that money?
Well, I think a lot of it is going to go towards their fleet expansion plans.
Okay.
They've placed some really big orders with Airbus recently for a whole bunch of new planes.
Like what kind of planes?
Well, they've ordered A330-900Ns, A321-200Ns, and a ton more A320-200Ns.
Wow.
Like they've got over 100 A320neos on order.
So they're going big.
They're going big.
Yeah.
And they've also got some of the longer range A321XLRs.
Right, so they're really trying to expand their network.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They want to fly to more places and carry more passengers.
Absolutely. And right now they operate a fleet of 63 aircraft from their base in Riyadh, and they're serving 69 destinations across 134 routes with around 286 daily flights.
Wow, so they're already a pretty big operation.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they're about to get a whole lot bigger.
Yeah, so this IPO really is kind of coming at a time when they are really rapidly expanding.
Yeah, they're on a roll.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're just getting started.
So last but not least, let's turn our attention to East Africa and look at the recovery efforts of Tanzania's Precision Air.
Right.
The CEO, Patrick Mwamre, has reported that they're seeing a decrease in their operating losses.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, which is a good sign.
Yeah, especially after the pandemic.
Right, because they were hit really hard.
A lot of airlines were.
Yeah, so what's driving this apparent turnaround?
Well, Maria said that they've been focusing on improving their operational efficiency.
Okay.
Optimizing their costs and improving their customer service.
So the basics?
Yeah, the basics.
Yeah.
But, those are really important things.
Right.
Especially in a tough market.
Yeah, you gotta get those down.
Exactly. You gotta get your house in order.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then you can start thinking about growth.
So they've been doing some interesting things. They've been focusing on kind of maximizing the use of their current fleet and their routes.
Right.
They've been trying to adopt technology to improve productivity. And they've even been looking at expanding into some underserved domestic markets like Baringa.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And they're also hoping to benefit from the government's investments in infrastructure.
Sure. That always helps.
Yeah, which is always a good thing for an airline.
Absolutely.
So I guess, those are all pretty sensible strategies.
I think so.
Right.
Especially for an airline that's in recovery mode.
Right.
They're not trying to do too much too soon.
Right.
They're taking a measured approach.
Okay. And they're also looking to strengthen their training center and their maintenance facilities.
Okay.
And the goal there isn't just to improve their own service quality, but also to potentially make some more money by offering these services to other operators.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah.
So they're trying to diversify their revenue streams.
Exactly.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Especially in this industry.
Right.
You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
No, absolutely not.
So that's a good move.
All right, so financially, they did post an operating loss in 2023.
Okay.
But it was a lot less than the losses they had in 2020.
Well, that's progress.
That's progress.
Right.
And the report we have here actually says that they had a profit in 2022.
Oh, really?
But it also says that could be a typo and it should probably be a loss.
Yeah, that sounds more likely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tough to turn a profit in this industry. Especially after a pandemic.
Right.
So, yeah, I'd say that's probably a typo.
Yeah. But regardless, their passenger numbers have rebounded to pre-pandemic levels.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. And their load factor improved to 65% in 2023.
65%. That's pretty respectable.
Yeah.
I mean, that means that on average, 65% of the seats on their planes were filled.
Right.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. So what is it about that number that makes it respectable?
Well, it shows that they're managing their capacity well.
Okay.
They're not flying planes that are half empty.
Right.
And it also suggests that their routes are commercially viable.
Gotcha.
People are actually buying tickets to fly on those routes.
So it's a good sign of recovery.
Exactly.
Okay, so right now, Precision Air is really focused on the stability of their ATR turboprop fleet.
Okay.
They do have aspirations to introduce jet aircraft sometime in the future, but right now they're really focused on just getting their current operations running smoothly and reliably.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and the CEO is optimistic that they can achieve operational break-even by 2026. And some months they've actually already been profitable.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, so that's really positive.
Yeah, that's very encouraging.
Yeah, so right now they serve 13 domestic destinations and 3 regional destinations from their base in Dar es Salaam.
Okay.
They have a fleet of 8 aircraft.
Right.
So I guess we'll see what happens, but it's looking...
Yeah, it's looking up for them.
Yeah, things are looking up.
Yeah, it's good to see.
All right, so for our listeners out there, what can we take away from all of this?
Well, I think it's clear that the aviation industry is still recovering from the pandemic.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of positive signs out there.
Absolutely.
Airlines are finding ways to adapt and innovate.
Right.
And there's a lot of growth potential in certain regions.
Yeah.
So I think the future is bright for the industry.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is we've seen, Air Mauritius take these huge financial steps.
Yeah.
We've seen Namibia kind of relaunching their, national airline.
Right, with a new approach. Hopefully.
Yeah, with a new approach.
Yeah.
FlyNas, gearing up for major growth, precision air recovering.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting snapshot of this really dynamic and
it is,
ever-evolving industry.
And it shows that there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
Every airline has to find its own path to success.
Absolutely.
Based on its own unique circumstances.
Yeah. So what's the final thought that we can leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the question is, how do all of these seemingly disparate events connect?
Okay.
We've got a debt-to-equity swap in Mauritius, a national airline reboot in Namibia,
right,
an IPO fueling expansion in Saudi Arabia,
right,
and a regional carrier's recovery in Tanzania.
Yeah.
So how do all of these things fit together?
Yeah.
What do they tell us about the bigger picture?
Okay.
What trends are emerging? What challenges are persisting? And what does all of this mean for the future of air travel?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it's something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, on that note, we're going to have to wrap things up.
Okay.
So for complete aviation solutions, this has
been another deep dive.
Another deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.